back from this. He takes it on head on. He confronts the prophets of Baal. He confronts King Ahab, who is the king of Israel, as well as his wife Jezebel. And he's having an effect here. God's using him powerfully. In fact, his effect is a nuisance to Queen Jezebel. And so finally she has enough, and she says to Elijah, "Tomorrow I'm going to kill you. Tomorrow I'm going to snuff you out." And we pick it up with 1 Kings chapter 19. And just to give you, again, this is a low point in Elijah's life. The queen of the land that he lives in wants to snuff him out, and he crashes emotionally and spiritually. And he takes off to a wilderness, and he says this, he prays this, "I have had enough, Lord." I've had enough, Lord. Ever pray that prayer? I've had enough, Lord. Take my life, he goes on to say. It tells you how low Elijah had gotten here. Now, it's a while before he gets the kind of response from God that he's looking for. But 40 days later, he hears God speak to him through a still, small voice. And essentially, in that conversation, God says, "I still have a plan for you, Elijah." And then God gives him the name of someone to pass his torch onto. Someone else to invest in and to share his connection with. And I'll give you that name in just a moment. But for now, I want to indicate and remind you that this happens at a low point in Elijah's life. He's not feeling very significant. He's feeling inadequate. He's ready to check out. Take my life, Lord. And it's odd. I think that so often when we talk about building into others' lives, we think that we build into them our strengths, we build into them our gifts. But in God's economy, it's when we minister and build out of our weaknesses that God's strength shines through. And it's at this point in Elijah's life when he feels most inadequate that God's going to use him most powerfully to pass the torch to this other person. And so I would say to you that if you're feeling weak or inadequate today, that maybe you're just in the right place where God's going to use you to be a torch passer this week. Well, after this time of being alone with God, God says this to Elijah a little further in the chapter. "Go back the way you came, go to the desert of Damascus, and when you get there, anoint Elisha, son of Shaphat, from Abel-Meholah, to succeed you as prophet." So there's the name, Elisha, and God says, "I want you to anoint him to succeed you as prophet." Now, how do you think he felt hearing those words? Right? Someone else is going to come along, and you're going to develop them. You know, when we build into another person, it always involves and requires a certain generosity on our part. It requires a generosity of spirit. It requires a generosity of time. And we can kind of romanticize this, right? Like, I'm going to build into them, and they're going to take, they're going to be appreciative of this, and they're going to really have a high admiration for me and all the sacrifice that I'm making. It's not a romanticized kind of thing. Sometimes investing in other people can be a pain in the neck. But rest assured, the one who matters ultimately notices. God notices when you invest in other people. Back to our story. So Elijah went from there. He obeyed God. He found Elisha, son of Shaphat. Elisha was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen, and he himself was driving the 12th pair. Elijah went up to him and threw his cloak around him. Elisha then left his oxen and ran after Elijah. "Let me kiss my father and mother goodbye," he said, "and then I will come with you." "Go back," Elijah replied. "What have I done to you?" So Elisha left him and went back. He took his yoke of oxen and slaughtered them. He burned the plowing equipment to cook the meat and gave it to the people, and they ate. And he set out to follow Elijah and become his attendant. Fabulous story. And what we have in the verses I just read is an amount of time that gets compressed into a very brief few verses. Now, Elijah is famous in Israel. He's the prophet in Israel. And God has sent him to find this man, Elisha, a young man. And Elijah sees Elisha plowing with his 12 yoke of oxen, 12 pair of oxen, and he's been thinking on this journey to Elisha about what he's going to do when he gets there. And the Bible tells us that when he does get there, he doesn't say anything. He takes off his cloak and he throws it over Elisha's shoulders. The old King James Version says he puts his mantle on Elisha. And that's where that saying, the mantle of leadership, comes from. It comes from this story in the Bible. In a very powerful way, Elijah is saying to Elisha, I want to walk with you. I want to share my time, my life with you. I want you to watch what I do. I want to teach you. I want to invest in you. I want to give you learning opportunities. I want to give you responsibilities. I want your light to burn bright, maybe one day even brighter than mine. Here's the mantle. Here's the mantle. Here's the torch. It's an amazing moment, and it's one that neither Elisha nor Elijah would ever forget. Now, did you notice how many oxen Elisha's plowing with here? The days of Elijah were days of great poverty in Israel, and a family was lucky if they owned a chicken. If you had 2 chickens, that was pretty good. If you owned an ox, you were considered affluent. Elisha is plowing here with 12 teams of oxen, so he has 24 oxen, which means that his family is extremely wealthy. But this is a country club kid, right? You can be sure that when Elisha turned 16, his dad was going to give him a chariot. And so what Elijah is asking of Elisha is an enormous sacrifice. The Bible says nothing about Elijah's background, on the other hand, but we can pretty safely assume that he came from a poor family, right? It was a time of poverty in Israel. And so to be a prophet didn't cost Elijah very much. He didn't have a lot of options. But Elisha is another story. He'll inherit from his daddy a way of life that'll make life very comfortable for him and will make him an important person in the community to the end of his days. And Elijah's supposed to go up to Elisha and ask him to give all of that up for a line of work which will probably result in poverty. And in the case of Elijah's life, where you're at odds with the political leaders who want you dead. Right? And I don't think it would have been easy for Elijah to make that ask. I think that as he sees this rich kid plowing, he's thinking to himself, I don't know, God, I'm not sure that's the guy. Right? Why would he do this? God, I have some experience as a prophet, and it's not all that inviting. And look at all he has there. I'll ask anybody. I'll pass my torch to anybody, but let it be someone other than this guy. It must be somebody other than this guy. But Elijah doesn't do that. He obeys God, and he makes the ask, which I think is important for you and I. If God lays it on your heart to make an ask, to invite someone to serve, to invite someone to commit, to invite someone to take a step, to grow, to encourage someone to get involved, man, don't shrink back. I know so many people who miss the adventure of torch bearing and torch passing because God brings somebody in their life, and yet they come up with all kinds of reasons of why this person doesn't need God. They're too wealthy, they're too comfortable, they're too busy. The fact is, everybody needs God. Everybody needs God's calling on their life, and sometimes God may use you to extend that calling to that other person. So don't shrink back. Don't chicken out. You never know who is one conversation away from being a torchbearer for God. I'll tell you one of the torchbearers in my life, a guy named Bob Haven. Barb and I were young. We were living in London, Ontario. We'd just gotten married. And when I had no experience, Bob, who was the senior pastor of the church that we went to, took me under his wing. I mean, I had nothing. I'd never been involved in the church. He let me lead with him. He let me spend time with him. Sometimes it was around work. Sometimes it was just socializing at the church or at their home or just talking. He gave me opportunities. He was the first guy who ever took a risk to let me preach. I hadn't even gone to seminary, never taken a communications preaching course, let alone studied Old Testament Hebrew or New Testament Greek. But Bob believed in me. Bob, slot